Hello, everyone. You are listening to SheLeads with Carly. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky, and my guest today is Lauren Dowling. Lauren is a senior product manager at Coinbase, one of the largest cryptocurrency exchange platforms. But after receiving her bachelor's and master's degree from Stanford, she dove right into product at Intuit for 3 years before also becoming a senior product manager at Intercom. She also actually carries some experience as a principal at a venture capital firm too, between these two positions, which we will obviously dive into. So I'm very excited to have you on the show, Lauren. You are also actually a current mentor of mine during the Mayfield Fellows program. So very grateful for that, to have met you through that. But anyway, Lauren, how are you doing today? What's going on?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me, Carly. I'm really excited to be here and chat with you more. It's been incredible getting to know you over the last couple years, and just really excited to chat.
Yeah, likewise. So first, set the scene. Where are you in the world? Are you guys working from home? I know Coinbase is pretty remote, right? So what's the work situation?
It is, yeah. So I'm based in Seattle, in Washington. My husband and I moved up here during the pandemic, and we are fully remote at Coinbase. So the company went completely remote. We've gotten rid of our headquarters. And so, it's been an amazing journey. We do actually have a bunch of offices all over the country. A lot of them are sort of like WeWork landing pads. So okay. I try to go in once a month to the office here. We've got, I think, more than 300 employees in the Seattle area now. So wow. It's pretty crazy, distributed, but nice. Lots of fun coworkers around.
Yeah, I'm sure, and we can talk about it. I'm sure that brings its own challenges and fun parts, aspects that come into being a product manager, especially. So before we even get into that, I want to take me back to graduating from Stanford. I know you also got a co-term, a master's in communication, but when did you discover product management? How did you break into product?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of my time at Stanford, I was working in startups, primarily on sort of the marketing and the branding side. Okay. Both my parents sort of have a background in business, but less on the technical side. And I really found my love of engineering and math and technology kind of late in my Stanford experience. I took CS 106A, which is one of the core computer science classes at Stanford, and found myself, I'd be out with friends and suddenly have unlocked the problem and would be coding on my arm, out with friends. Yeah. And so I didn't really know what product management was, or that it was even an option, and had heard about it as I was coming into the Mayfield Fellows program, which you referenced. Yeah. And that's a program at Stanford where 12 students go through basically an entrepreneurial journey, and maybe 6 of the kids in my cohort ended up getting product management roles. I actually still went with a partnerships job, and I kind of got to vicariously live through their experience and heard so much about how this role really sits at the center of technology and business and the customer. And I was like, that sounds really cool and very interesting. And really thought that if I was going into product, I would want to be at a larger company where I would have a little bit more structure, a little bit more mentorship in, trying out this new role. And actually, a friend of mine from Mayfield had been in the Intuit rotational program and mentioned it to me. And I ended up interviewing, just fell in love with my interviewers and the company. And so that's kind of how I ended up there in this rotational program.
Yeah. Okay. So what I've learned is that seems like there's 2 paths, right? You have the rotational program, associate PM program that I've talked about. I've interviewed some that have gone through that process. And then you also have, the job descriptions that are 5+, 7+ years of experience. So obviously you went through that rotational program. What is the value? How did you stand out compared to others to get into it? And then also, once you're there, what was the biggest value add?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the rotational development programs are amazing. These companies who offer them really pour so much investment in making people successful. And we actually have recently started, last year was the first year of our associate PM cohort at Coinbase, and I'm part of leading that program as well. They're just amazing programs. I think when I got into product 8 or 9 years ago, it was still very competitive, but it wasn't quite the job that it is today, right? So many people want to be in product now. And so I think it was maybe a little bit easier. How to differentiate yourself when you get in. Such a great question. I think coming out of college, some people have internship experience in product, but most people don't. I think most of the companies really are still looking for a broad set of different types of people coming in their classes. So that's good news. Even if you didn't take computer science, even if you haven't had a product internship before, you can still probably get into these programs. I would definitely recommend studying the PM interview. There's a bunch of books or, resources that you can look at. They are pretty structured in a specific way that you can learn if you practice. And then the other thing I would say is bring your whole self to the interview. I definitely didn't feel like I aced all of the interviews that I had. One of them I felt like I didn't do very well, but I had a ton of energy. I was super curious because I didn't know how to solve the problem, but I wanted to learn. And I think that shows up really well. We're not expecting you to come in as a senior product manager, just as somebody who's hungry and willing to learn and excited about this space and can demonstrate sort of some of the core skills like clear communication and willingness to kind of grow. And so I think those are the biggest things that can help you kind of stand out, even if you haven't had that experience before.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, these rotational programs, associate PM programs, even at Coinbase now, it's more so for people, who don't have that experience. It's not necessarily right out of college, right? Or is it usually recent grads?
Yeah, great question. So there's the different programs at the different companies kind of spin different ways. So the Coinbase program, given we're just wrapping up the first year of our inaugural class, was targeted at college students getting their first job in product. We have historically had an associate PM program that was about people moving from other functions or other industries into product. And different companies have different offerings. So I'd recommend you just read and ask questions. But I think, there's lots of different ways to get into product in these kinds of programs out there.
So take me now as a rotational product manager, or at least a PM in the rotational program. What is your day-to-day, but also what are some key things that were maybe challenges that you encountered that were different than what you expected?
Absolutely. So part of what's amazing about a lot of these programs is the onboarding and training you get up front. So all the companies do it differently. When I was at Intuit, we had 4 weeks where the whole class, and we were actually multifunctional. It was across marketing and HR. So all of us got to onboard together to Intuit. And then we had a couple sort of track specific onboardings. When you actually get into the day-to-day of your experience, it's a lot like being a normal PM. And so what does that mean and what does that look like? Basically, you want to be, particularly at Intuit, they are huge on customer centricity, which I also think is a huge superpower in any product role that you can be in. But the very first thing that you have to do is go talk to customers and understand their businesses and learn what matters to them and what doesn't matter to them. We had what we called follow me homes, where you would go watch customers use your product, which is the most eye-opening experience I think you can have as a product manager, when people are like, this isn't hard, and then it takes them an hour to do something that actually shouldn't be hard, but it's unrealized pain. So that's kind of the first step, is understand your customers, meet your team, see how Scrum and Agile works, learn how the tools work, and then you get to write your first sort of product requirements document. And that's basically a journey of sort of going through and working with the teams, defining the problem, defining the solution with design partners and engineering partners, and getting that launched and measuring the success. And so it's really fun. You get a lot of decision-making power. And I think, funny enough, in the first rotation I had, there were lots of product learnings, but a lot of the learnings were actually just how to be a person in a company. How do you say you don't know something without giving up your authority? Or how do you say no to people when you're the most junior person in the room, but your team doesn't have capacity? And so how do you, take notes in a meeting and send out follow-up items, and, all of those kinds of things that could make you successful in any role. And then, happy to talk about some of the surprises as well.
Yeah. So actually, even when you talked about customer centric and customer centricity, essentially, when you're interviewing PMs now, how do you get a good sense of that? Because, on the one hand, they could easily say like, well, we'd talk to the customer and we'd reiterate through it and then we'd go back and talk. But like, it's different when you're actually in the role and you're talking to customers and you're interviewing, things like that. Is there a good sense to gauge?
That's a really good question. I think there's a couple of different ways we gauge whether somebody has like the ability to learn from the customer. The first is, do they even think about it when they're going through a problem, right? If we were to say, hey, you're head of product at, Instagram, like how do you decide what you want to build? If you don't talk about your customer segments or like the business unit as a way of narrowing,
right,
that's an indication. Then, or like you jump straight to solutions, that's an indication maybe you're not thinking about the customer. When I'm in interviews, and I do this with product managers, I do this with program managers, I do this really with anyone who's required to be close to the product decisions that happen. But I will ask people to tell me about a time where they got a customer insight, either qualitative or quantitative, that changed the direction they were heading in a product. Because that's not just like something that confirmed what they already believed, but it shows that they listened, they took in something that, went against where they were going, and they were able to incorporate that in either a small or large way in the way that they executed the project.
Nice. Yeah. No, it makes sense. And okay, back to those surprises, or at least what was hard to learn? Yes, exactly. What were some of those?
Yeah, so I think there were a lot of things that were really hard to learn. I have a couple, the big oopsies are definitely the ones that stand out when you think about it. But some of the things that were really hard for me to learn were, what are all the edge cases, right? Like it's really easy when you come in as a new product manager, you don't totally know the product or the customer, to think about what we call like the happy path, or like, hey, you do all the things right, what happens? Or, hey, here's the clear few things that could go wrong. Easy to design for those, easy to think those through. One of the biggest hard things for me to learn was the edge cases. And for Intuit on QuickBooks, we were building accounting software. And the first thing I ever built was around like bill pay and bill management and the system for how you input all of that. And I, for example, did not know that a lot of accountants will go in and just put journal entries. And so they don't use all the UI that you build for the business owner who doesn't know how this works. And so when we were shipping the upgrades to the product, I didn't know journal entries existed. I didn't think about them when I wrote my spec. And we shipped a product that didn't support them. And we had like a very high priority bug. We had to like roll back the fix. And I worked with the team to figure out like, hey, what went wrong? What do we need to do to like adapt this and make this work? And I think we got a fix out within like 2 or 3 days of the initial launch. We rolled it back and then rolled it out again. Shipping something wrong that breaks the product is a really quick way to learn what to never do again. I had a number of those, but really teaches you the power of edge cases and also of understanding all the customers and the user journeys that might happen in a single experience.
So, okay, looking back at this experience and, maybe a handful of others, how would you, prepare for those edge cases? How would you kind of ensure that you've covered all the grounds and, if something comes up, it's maybe not a shock or how do you go about it now?
That's a great question. One of the things I think I learned in that moment is not to move solo through things. Like one of the things I think that can be a trap as a product manager is it's your job and your responsibility to lead the product, define what you're doing, and everyone should just kind of be order takers from you. And I think that's the worst way to do product. I've never ever operated that way since I think my first month on the job. And so what I do now, and you're never going to find everything. So it's okay if things get missed, you can fix them as you go, but I make it a collaborative process. And so what that means is I'll say, hey, here are the requirements. Who agrees or disagrees with them? I'll ask the engineers, hey, are there pieces of the code that you don't think are addressed by this solution? Are there experiences or users you've encountered that you think like this will not work for? And so kind of trying to bring that ownership mentality to everyone to say, hey, don't just read this and execute it, but let's work together to make sure that it's complete, that it has everything that we can think of. And a lot of times this comes up when engineers are implementing, right? Like they'll be coding and they'll be like, hey, I see the design works this way. I don't think that's going to work in the code. And then you bring your designer over and you like sit together and fix it. And sort of that's kind of more the magic, in my opinion, of product is that true collaboration and not just like throwing one thing over to the wall to the next person on the assembly line to get it done.
Yeah. Also, I think it made me think of from an engineering perspective, it also helps the engineer, kind of have a sense of like, okay, this is the intention, this is the this is what we want to do, and this is why we're doing it. So I think that also helps a lot. Speaking of engineers, though, obviously there's, a lot of discussion about the importance of a technical background versus, maybe you don't need one and it's kind of hyped, all these different aspects that come into it. What is your experience, particularly whether, I know you said you did CS 106A, it's an introductory class. Was that enough for you to have this technical background, or have you experienced some, friction between engineers ever?
Great question. So I would not consider myself a PM with a technical background.
Okay.
I did take like a few computer science classes at Stanford. I took some of them pass-fail just so I could take them for fun.
Yeah.
But you don't want me anywhere near anyone's code for anything. What I will say, there are certain companies, particularly those that are like API products or things that are much more wholly technical in nature, where they do really look for and value a technical background and somebody who can be very, very, very deep in the weeds with the engineers. Most of the companies all the companies I've worked at, and I would say most companies in tech, the more important thing is to have technical curiosity. And so there are definitely companies that'll be more open to less technical folks in the beginning. And I think that's where you can build your technical skill set. And while I don't have a technical background, I actually think working with engineers is a superpower of mine because I'm curious. I'm willing to ask as many questions as I need to understand the trade-offs. And I think as a product manager, what you really need to understand is not the code, not the technologies we're using in the tech stack, but the architecture and how that impacts the customer. So always when engineers are showing me trade-offs or making design decisions, I'll say, what did you consider? And what is the impact on the customer for either of these decisions now and in the future? And that's sort of the way that you can start to understand, because it's you don't want to take away the engineer's job. They're brilliant. You want to let them own as much as they want, and it frees you up to do other things like talk to customers. But what you do want to do is make sure that the decisions that are being made are sound with the feature you're building now and the vision you have for the future.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's perfect. That's amazing. I want to know now, part of being a product manager is, kind of what you said, bringing everyone together, whether it's the designers, the engineers, and the engineering mindset is also very different from a designer. And I've seen this, at Wix with my team, and particularly, you have a new product or a new feature that you want to release, and the designer is, very excited and has all these ideas, and the PM is very excited. Whereas the engineer, they have a different aspect, and they're just thinking, okay, how much is this to code and how much is it to maintain and all the different things that come into it. Have you ever experienced where, you really have to change your messaging for the engineer versus the designer, or has it really been like a collective effort?
That's a great question. There are definitely times where different functions have been more or less excited from the get-go on a project. One of the biggest things I've learned through my careers is product managers and designers have a lot more access and visibility to the customer, to the problems, and to the company strategy often. Yeah. And so our ability to easily get excited about problems or features is because we've seen the pain that customers have experienced, or we understand how this ties to our goals or the vision of where we're going. And I think there's a lot of places where engineers are really just treated as like the engine that ships things and not as a core part of the whole process. Right. And so one of the things that I think has been amazing in most of the companies that I've worked with is they really have this mentality that the engineers also need to understand the customer problem. They also need to be brought along the journey because everyone just wants to have impact. And yes, the engineers are also responsible for reliability and maintaining the code and helping you scope, but that's not really where I've seen them get passionate, right? Their passion is around, wow, this is an amazing technology that will, dramatically improve the way our product works, or ooh, if we just do this, we can have such huge impact on the customer and the business. And so I've often found, I'm sure this isn't always the case, that it's really about sort of opening up spending time sharing that background with the team, which gets everyone excited. And one of the tactical things I've done to make that more of a reality. We obviously have team all hands that talks a lot about our high level strategy, but I have what I call like a weekly product download where I sit with my engineers, my designers, and any of my like close cross-functional partners in marketing or data or research who want to come. And I just talk about what I'm doing and what I'm learning. And I'll have the designers and the researchers come in and share also. So the researcher can come say, we just conducted this research. Here's some like verbatims from customers. I'll say, here's a big decision, we're working on one of our features, and here's sort of how we're thinking about it. And so that gives them so much context and also room to engage with it. There's two big benefits. One is I see them way more excited and aligned with the roadmap that we're building. And the second is they make so many more decisions without needing my input because they've been brought along all the thinking. They know what we're trying to do. And so they don't have to ask me, should I do this or that? They just know. They'll say, oh, I'm doing this. And that level of autonomy that they have really helps everybody achieve more scale in the way that they work.
Yeah. Wow. It's essentially just bringing everyone into the room, putting everyone on the same page. Everyone deserves a seat at the table, whether it's just about product, so I love that, it makes sense. And it seems like it's almost the outcome is better for you as well, like as a leader, because as you said, like they have the autonomy, which is great.
It is. And I think the hard thing is like, one of the things I've run into in the past is you don't want to take people's time. You want to give them time to do their work. You don't want to, more meetings, whatever.
Yeah.
But what I have found is slowing down, spending time to make sure everyone has the relevant context will always pay dividends. So even if everyone's burnt out and doesn't have enough time to do things, this may feel like it's taking time in the beginning, but it gives so much time back in the long run because everyone has the context.
Okay, so before we jump into diving into venture capital, I actually want to ask you a follow-up to that, which is, it seems easy, right? To bring everyone into the room, get everyone aligned, especially when it's a small team. You have a couple engineers, couple designers, couple researchers, and whatnot. How does this change when the team is scaling? And now you're a senior PM or you're a VP of product, and now you're managing other PMs. Like, how does it look then?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've had a lot of fun in my current role. I've been at Coinbase for a little over a year and a half. When I joined, our cross-functional team was like 8 people. I think we were 6 engineers, a designer, me, and an engineering manager. We grew to like 20 engineers and 3 designers and me and my manager before we hired another PM. So I've seen this in action. And I think there's a lot of different things that happen as you grow. The first is your scope and ambition grows. And so one of the things that we've found that's really important is finding ways to narrow the scope for individuals on the team, right? As a product manager, you have to think about sort of the whole product. But if you're trying to ask every single engineer to know everything that's happening in the product at any given time, they're spread so thin that it's sometimes hard for them to go deep. And so what we've really structured is, or what I've found as I've grown in my career, is the more senior you get and the bigger your team gets, the more you need to be broad and you need to empower the people under you, whether it's designers or product managers or engineers, to be the people who go deep and to take ownership of those problems so that you can be front running the next month or the next quarter or the next huge project and getting that in place and giving them all the tools, all the context, all the support they need to make some of the on the ground day-to-day product and project decisions, because I think a pitfall you can fall into, and even as you start having product managers under you, is wanting, you may know more, you may be slightly better, and wanting to be sort of like help the team be 100% right in every decision that they're making. And I think one of the hardest things to learn, and it's a skill that I'm building right now, is learning to let the team be 80% right or 90% right or 70% right and just go. And it's going to be better long run for me to not be involved in that decision than to continue to have the team rely on me to get it to what I think is 100% right. And to be clear, there's never a right decision. 100% right is not a thing. And giving that sort of room and that space is a really important skill as you grow in your product career.
Yeah. And so what does that look like? It means, they make a decision and you kind of just let them be and run with it and see, or how does that play in action?
Yeah, so there's lots of different ways you can do that. So one of the things, you can't just one day like drop kick them and be like, you now get to make all the decisions and like I'll be here supporting you no matter what you decide. So a lot of what that kind of training looks like is, people will come to you and ask you, hey, should we do X or Y? And instead of telling them based on your thinking, here's what I think and here's why, you say, can you explain to me what are the pros and cons, like which one do you think and why, and give me your rationale for the pros and cons of each. And if they work their way through to an answer that you think is a good one, then you say, fantastic, yes, that's right. If you look through that and you say, hey, like I disagree with this premise, though I think the decision's still right, you can help them sort of refine their thinking. And what that does is it kind of puts the ball in their court. Instead of saying, hey, help me figure out how to make this decision, they're giving you all the logic. And it also makes it way faster for me to respond, even if I disagree, right? Because I don't have to do all the thinking to figure out the pros and cons. I get to say like, yes, I agree with all of this. You're good to go. And over time, you build that trust and that confidence together. And then I get to back further and further out of the process because they go, cool, I'm doing this. And here's why. Hey, I've done this. And then I can ask questions if it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay. So I want to hear about this, this experience you had going into venture capital as a principal. Yes, tell me about that process, and then obviously now going back to product at Coinbase. So what was this process like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I loved my job at Intuit. You can ask people who were there when I left. I still went back to the office like at least once a month for I think like 6 months. And still some of my best friends in the world are from that job and experience. I had 2 of my former managers from there were invited to my wedding. Like, anyway, we don't have to go deep into that, but I really loved it. So I was not really looking to make a move. However, when I was in school, I had always been extremely intrigued by venture capital. And the biggest reason for me is I'm a really curious person. I love learning. And venture always to me seemed like this amazing opportunity to learn many industries and many companies all at once and help them all grow at the same time and just have like that multiplied experience. And so towards the tail end of my time at Intuit, I was approached to join a seed stage venture capital firm, was really impressed by the partner, and Intuit was going through some leadership change, some CEO succession at the time. So things had kind of slowed down while that transition was happening and the strategy was being sort of formalized. And so I decided, hey, why not? I'm young, I'm early in my career. This is an amazing opportunity. Let's go try it. And I think going into venture was amazing for me in a lot of different ways. The first was I learned a lot about the true value of sales and marketing. When you work at a company like Intuit, where most of your product is a self-serve product, so people come in, they sign up for themselves. We have a little bit of sales, but not really in the product that I worked on. We're the dominant brand leader for decades at this point. You can come to the conclusion that if you build it, they will come, and it's all about having like the right product. And if you do, people will magically find you. And I think one of the biggest things I learned in venture was that's just not true. Having the best product is amazing, and you need to solve customer problems and delight them. And that's a key piece of the puzzle. But if you can't sell it and people can't find you, you're not going anywhere. So that was a huge learning for me that I've taken with me in my career and has been just a huge asset in the way that I work with marketing and sales and all those folks now. The other amazing thing for me was I joined venture in 2017 during the last crypto bull run, and it was my crash course in blockchain and cryptocurrency. So I actually spent my year and a half at the venture firm mostly looking into crypto companies, learning about Bitcoin and the blockchain, reading a bunch of white papers, and obviously it's come full circle to Coinbase, and I think that's a huge reason that I was able to get the job at Coinbase down the line. So that was really great.
Wow.
The things that I didn't love about, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No. Go ahead. No, it sounds fascinating. It's interesting how it all came full circle, like you said, because you do really get exposed to different industries. And I guess I will ask, when you were exploring cryptocurrency, what does that look like? Are you helping your portfolio companies? Are you, helping them with the product management aspect, or how did that look?
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't end up making a lot of crypto investments while I was at the company. We made a few. So a lot of what it looked like was trying to figure out my thesis on the blockchain and crypto industry that would help orient us towards the types of companies and investments we might want to make. And we did start looking at some of those companies as I was sort of later in my time at the venture firm. But for those of you who remember back to 2017 in crypto, there was a lot less than what exists today. It was still so early in the market. And so a lot of businesses we were talking to, they didn't really understand the technology, or it was so early and hard to understand. And then we would meet with teams like the Filecoin team, who was already past seed stage and who had really kind of found what they were doing. But yeah, so it was much more for me about learning the market. I met with so many companies that helped me formalize my thesis and what I thought could make sense and couldn't make sense, learning about the technology, and then also shadowing the partner who was amazing and watching the way he interacted on the rest of his portfolio. So he was not crypto-centric. He was very generalist. So also just learning all these business fundamentals in all the industries and all the technologies that he was already investing in was amazing.
Wow. Okay. So take me to the process of Coinbase. So getting that opportunity, particularly, how do you think of, role being senior PM and your role versus industry versus company? How do you play all of those together? What's important? What's not so important?
Absolutely. First, I will say what's important and not important is going to be specific to you and specific to the point that you're at in your career. So I know there are some people who are dying to move into management, and they absolutely will not take a job that's not at least a group PM level. There's other people who, manager or not manager, are much more interested in the type of work that they're working on. So it's a very individual process. When I was looking at Coinbase, there were a couple things I was really, really orienting myself for. The first was culture. So I have found in my career, starting with Intuit, which just kicked it off very well, as I think I've made very clear on this podcast, that culture is hugely important. Being at a company where you're aligned with the values, where you're aligned with the decision-making frameworks and the principles that they use to operate their business, and being at a company that's going to invest in its people and grow them internally and give you opportunities if you're doing well, is something I care a lot about. So culture was my number one thing when I was looking for my next company. And I think something I found for me that makes a cultural fit is a culture that values an ownership mindset. So somebody who's not going to stay in their lane, but who's going to spot problems and think about them and push things forward. The second thing I was looking for was I wanted to be somewhere that was going to challenge me and help me grow. And that can be at my, in my level, or that can be in, in product skill set, or that even can just be sort of as a person in the business world. Yeah. And the amazing thing about Coinbase is crypto's still so new. Even if you didn't grow any of your PM skill sets at all, which I have, and it's been a crash course in everything I already thought I could do well as a product manager, the industry's moving so fast. And there's so much to learn about there that I think it's kind of amazing to watch a new industry start for the first time, and it's pretty rare opportunity. So that's been amazing. And then the last thing is the people. Coinbase has by far been the best group of people I've ever worked with, the most intelligent, the most qualified, the most capable, the most hungry, and it just makes coming to work every day a dream. And that's everyone. Every single person I've come into contact at this company has been of the highest caliber. It's I'm actually not totally sure how we do it, even though I interview a lot of people.
Wow. And honestly, it sounds amazing. Even more so the fact that you guys are pretty much remote. And you mentioned two aspects, the culture and the people, which, it's a huge testament to the company and everything. So it's amazing. I want to ask you, before we get to, fun questions, your favorite product, things like that, I do want to know, you mentioned how this industry, it's growing like crazy and it's changing every day, things like that. Already as a product manager, you have so many voices coming, whether it's user feedback, whether it's, new features that contribute to business strategy, all these aspects now on top of, industry and how the industry is changing and what people are saying. How do you play all of these different voices, in your day-to-day as a product leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. I often view myself, and I've said this before, but I think of my job as being chief translator in many ways. Like your job is to translate the business goals to the designers and the engineers and the customer needs and the technology to the customers. So you're sitting as this kind of translation engine in the middle and sort of decision maker. And I have always found that I really try and let the strategy and the customer win and feed everything through that. And so the loudest voice in my head often is the customer voice. And I find I'm somebody who, and I've lapsed in this a little for probably the last 3 or 6 months as we've grown so much, but I usually try to talk to 1 to 5 customers a week. I try to do 2 a week is a really, really, really great cadence I've found to feel like I know our customers and I know what their problems are and I know where the product's okay and I know the kinds of trade-offs we can make if we have to make tough decisions about what matters and what doesn't matter. I look at our customer data with a very high frequency, and so that kind of guides me more than anything. I've always, and I think Intuit really instilled this in me, but if you solve customer problems, business outcomes for yourself will follow. And so we used to talk about what is the customer benefit metric? What benefit does the customer experience for us delivering this? And then because of that benefit, what business metric do we think that's going to move? But it always started with the customer. So that's usually the loudest voice in product decisions. And outside of that, I really try to listen to everyone. I think I've never viewed myself, honestly, as the idea person. I find often some of the coolest, most leapfrogging ideas come from the engineering team. Designers are way more creative than I am at the actual, how we execute solutions, even when we have an idea. And so I really try to be that person who brings that customer voice and then gets out of the way and asks questions, not oh, I don't like this, but hey, the customer is really trying to do this and this seems like it might add friction to the process. Why did we make that decision? And so it's less about my opinion, which I have plenty of them, but it's a lot more about how we can cater it to the sort of customer that we understand really well.
Yeah, I love how you put it almost as the translator, because it seems like a very common theme. I actually, in another episode, we talk about, making it so digestible, almost like a Instagram caption or a TikTok nowadays. So it's making it so digestible for them to really understand and be aligned. So I think it seems very important and integral. So I love it.
I think that's one thing that has been a really tough learning. In college and high school, when you're going through school, it's write a longer paper, do a bigger essay, bigger paragraphs. I wrote a 40-page thesis. And in business, it's if it's more than one paragraph, no one wants to read it. Actually, It shouldn't be a paragraph. It should be bullet points. And so I think thinking about being really clear and concise, pulling out as many words as you can when you're trying to explain things and making sure they're the most powerful, illustrative words you can use takes a lot of time. There's this amazing quote that I'll butcher right now, but it's something along the lines of I would have made this shorter, but I didn't have the time. And I think it's way easy to write long things and stream of consciousness into a piece of paper. And what's much more challenging is being really crisp and concise. And I think particularly as an early product manager, if you can hone that skill, that's a superpower to have in your arsenal.
So I have to ask, do you have tips? How do you hone that skill, right? Is it just kind of practicing iteration and studying, that sentence and how to minimize it, or what does it look like?
Yeah, so I think on the important things that I write, like a product requirements document, or if we're presenting a deck up to leaders or things like that, I will often write them. Try to write them in bullets. I try not to write in like full sentences if I can help it, unless I think it's like really important to get the full context. And then I'll put it away. And whether I put it away for three hours or a day or two, and then I come back and I reread it. And like kind of with every word, you have to ask yourself, do I need this word?
Yeah.
Is it helpful? Does this thought matter? Does it make my argument or my like proposal stronger, or is it just there? And being kind of ruthless in pulling that stuff out is not a core competency of mine, but I've worked with a lot of people who do that pretty rigorously, and their written communication is some of the strongest I've ever seen. Wow. And every time they send something, people are like, wow, and they get the takeaway and they pull it out. So that's a good inspiration to keep practicing and keep trying.
Yeah, no, it seems like a very important skill. So yeah, that's great. Okay, Lauren, I have to ask, what is your favorite product?
That's such a good question. Yes. Right now, and I it's like kind of a love-hate relationship I have to say my Peloton. And the reason I'm hesitant to say that is there's so many things about their app and their user experience that I don't like. And I have a friend who works there who I just like ping all the time to be like, this is weird, this is weird, this is weird. But it is also kind of my sanity. Like I spend time, if I have like 5 minutes between meetings, I'll like open the Peloton app and try and look and see like, hey, what class do I want to take later? And I think one of the things I've been trying to prioritize, particularly in a company that's remote where I like sit in this chair all day and my kitchen's 2 steps from here, is moving and being healthy and like working out. And so trying to make that a really big habit and integral part of my life has been really fun. And it's something that brings me a lot of joy. And so I think for me, like a product doesn't have to be perfect to be a great product. It just has to like delight you in some way. And it does that for me, even though there's lots of parts of their flow that I would really like to change.
It's okay. Your friend will work on it. It'll
totally.
Be there. Don't worry.
Totally.
So first of all, Lauren, thank you so much. It was so great. I learned so much. And yes, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast. Really great talking with you.